Now it's recording. Still worried about it. Now you're getting no light here, right? I'm okay here. That's bizarre. You can't see it, can you? Oh, I know what I did. Because I flipped the, I flipped the version so that you see that and I see this. That's weird. Can anybody see the flip thing? Now you see that, I see this. I'll see this. It's just that each of us sees this. You can only show one or another one of us the thing. I don't know why that's not bright. I don't know why that's not bright. I don't have an answer to that. It's on the screen, it's okay. In any event, continuing on here, if we say the short-term goal will be written in the same format, I'm going to go this far, then I'm going to go into Darryl, and we'll actually write goals for Darryl, or see what we did in the book. Write goals. So in any event, the client will produce a range of narratives, if you can see that, in a variety of communicative contexts. That's the goal you've written at the short-term level. Then, and you have to, in writing that goal, have a developmental taxonomy to follow Bloom and Leahy then. Then at the short-term level, you're going to write a goal that's going to be consistent with that taxonomy. You're going to decide then at the end of a term, is this child capable of achieving an additive narrative, a temporal or a causal narrative, or something else? It's got to be, though, related to that. It's going to be consistent with the long-term goal you've written. And in this case, we wrote, with reference to current behavior, client will produce temporal narratives in a play context. And a temporal narrative is, do this, that, and that, and the other thing. Now, when you write a long-term goal, you may have to target other parts at the long-term level first, and then at the short-term level, the component parts of language that make up the long-term target. So we target narratives, but narratives are big things. They're complicated. They have a lot of stuff inside of them. And stuff inside of a story can be developed not just over a term or a couple of years, but throughout one's entire lifetime. If you're a storyteller or a writer, we do textbooks, Client and myself, for at least at times. Well, to write these things, at my age, I'm still learning. I'm still to this day figuring out other ways and better ways to do it. So these are subordinate long-term goals that one could get at. So if the long-term goal is to produce a range of complex, a range of narratives, we could also write in the long term, we would have to develop a range of potentially complex sentences. Now, if we say that at the long term it's to produce narratives and long-term range and complex sentences, and at the short term to produce additive, temporal, and causal, what would we have to do at the short-term level? Well, maybe for the term, or particular terms, we would also target at the short-term level a goal such as to produce additive, temporal, and causal complex sentences, because we recognize that to create a narrative that is a time sequence narrative as the long-term goal, you'd also have to make the sentences within the narrative, if that makes any sense to you. So at the short-term level, we would target not only maybe a story, but the types of sentences we want to see the child produce within the story. You following me? And we're always going to be writing goals as observable, measurable things. By the way, the goal will never be to recall sentences or to so unused to writing these other kinds of goals, I'm having trouble thinking of a quick one that would be non-acceptable. To remember, you can't write to the long-term as to remember a series of events, or to, because you can't use the word remember, because you can't measure remembering, or anything like that. But I can see an additive sentence. I can see a temporal. I can observe and record the production. I don't know why that's, again, not right. If the long-term goal is to produce Brown's developmental morphemes, if you're writing in Brown terms, then the short-term goal has to be one of Brown's morphemes. It can't be something else. You following me? Your short-term goal is going to be a version of some component, something that's going to relate to the achievement of the long-term goal, and a linguistic thing. By the way, a temporal, additive, and causal complex sentence is a category of semantic relation, which refers to that the mind's ability, the property of the mind that generates language. The short-term goal, if it's to do, say the long-term goal is to create a temporal sentence, the short-term goal isn't going to be to recall recipes for making cakes, because recipes for making cakes can in fact make up a temporal narrative, right? First you put in or for making pancakes, I know pancakes. I make them for my kids. So I know a cup of flour, cup of an egg, cup of milk, I use buttermilk and milk, and oil, you need oil, right? Then a cup of oil. Well, that's cool, but that is not a short-term goal, because that's not functional communication. You can talk about one thing and one thing only, making a stupid pancake. A, and B, making pancakes isn't language, isn't the mind property of language. It's what you've learned to, what I've learned to do as the kid's father, out of necessity. Following me on that?
It's good for like learning directions.
Well, are we going to accept directions as a goal? And I'm about to get to the point to remind you that things like that are never a goal, ever, at the long or short-term level, because the term directions does not come from language. It comes from some adult head or a teacher head. It doesn't come from language. Now, by the way, making pancakes, that's a perfect session goal. I will shift and say during a session, making a pancake, making pancakes and remembering a recipe, well, that's a perfect, reciting a recipe, well, that's a perfect event that gets the kid to practice temporal narratives. I do that myself, and we do some version of that in the reading program we do, things like that. But in the long term, after a term, if the only thing the kid can do is a pancake recipe, bless you, then you're not dealing with language. You're following me? Because talking is not pancake recipe. It's just one instance of it, talking. It's an instance. It's a session. Following me on this, everybody? So now if the long-term goal, on the other hand, and the short-term goal is going to follow a taxonomy. So if you're doing Bloom and Leahy, you're not doing Brown's morphemes. But if you're doing Brown, then you will write your short-term goals in a Brown format. And you will say that to produce, say, if the long-term goal is to produce all of Brown's developmental morphemes, or age-appropriate ones, then the short-term goal is legitimately to produce, say, a regular past tense. That's legitimate, because that's something, again, that's linguistic, and that applies to lots of verbs. And it would generate, be productive in a lot of senses. I'm not a fan of Brown, but it's still cool. It's your decision you'll make. So both for long-term and short-term goals, you're working off of a taxonomy, just reminding you on that. Now, if you wrote a long-term goal, we're just pointing this out, if you wrote a long-term goal such as to improve receptive and expressive language, you've got nowhere to go. It gives you no direction. That's not based upon any taxonomy, and it's absolutely unacceptable. Not to mention receptive and acceptive, quite frankly, well, they exist in a kind of a way. So when you're writing your long-term goal, you're going to identify an area of functional speech or language that requires modification based on the assessment of the child, some diagnostic assessment. You don't just write a long-term goal off the top of your head. You have an assessment in front of you, and you identify a taxonomy that's going to guide you. You must do that. And on the LIU format or whatever goal writing format you use, you're going to cite the taxonomy you're using, and you're going to determine the level of accomplishment within the hierarchy given if you're using Bloom and Leahy again. Well, you have to look at the diagnostic information to see where the child is presently on the taxonomy before you start writing your goals. And then you write your goal as the next step, or a long-term goal will be written as a projection, a 1 to 3 year projection, and you consider what is this child, where on this taxonomy is the child capable to get? A Leahy taxonomy goes through narratives at A+, causal chain narratives. At phases 6, 7, and 8, then it's complex sentences, additive, temporal, causal, epistemic, etc., reflecting conjunction, complementation, and relativization syntax. You following me? Your goals won't be pulled off the top of your head. It's going to be with reference to research on development and the diagnostic report on the client that you have in front of you. Am I making sense here? Now, things challenge you in writing a long-term goal. You're going to have, according to this format, and then a short-term goal with reference to the format I'm talking about. You're going to have things out there in the real world that will compete for your attention. One is the Common Core curriculum. Now, the Common Core curriculum, if you're working in the DOE, you are going to have to show how your goals relate to the Common Core curriculum. And the Common Core curriculum addresses specific academic goals that teachers get at in English class, reading, spelling, science, math. So you have to try to make that connection. You're going to be challenged to make the connection between developmental things and curriculum things. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, that is exactly what our job is in the school system, is to really is to work on with kids and alert staff that we work with in an interprofessional way what relationship making capacities the child needs to acquire in order to really understand some of the math curriculum or the science curriculum or the English reading and writing curricula, which deals with narratives, etc., from first grade on, really, from kindergarten, first grade on. But that's a challenge. Another challenge are what Alan Camus talks about as a meme, or myths or memes. That is, you say the word following directions, or sequencing, or auditory processing disorder, auditory processing. These are memes. They don't exist. Nothing that exists in the domain of language. They're terms that are created by clinicians traditionally that try to take the place of our evidence, actual research evidence that specifies specific aspects of language and areas that can be targeted, and all the many things that influence what you're targeting, the maintaining factors, and the hierarchy of achievements kids have to go through to get at these things. So when you use a term like following directions or sequencing and stuff, these are made up. These have nothing to do with research, nothing to do with normal development. They're made up by teachers and people who write these curricula out there who are not linguists. They're not doing things based on research. And they're just general terminologies that allow you not to think. They're about not thinking. I have posted the Camus material for you to look at, and I've spoken about this before. Myths and memes, you've got to deal with that. And there's these myths and memes, by the way, following direction. Everyone loves to talk about them, and that's because they require less thinking. They're simplistic, and then they repeat, they regenerate themselves over and over again. Very hard to deal with, very challenging. So I'm going to, rather than do, well, there's some, in the presentations we do, when we go across the lifespan, which kinds of goals here are acceptable, at least to what I'm talking about, and then we'll go to the Darrow material and actually write long and short-term goals. Number 2 is a child goal. A child's 7-9 language will follow multi-step directives across all contexts. Well, is that an acceptable long-term goal from the perspective I'm presenting here?
What was it?
Number 2 goal, is that acceptable? Is that what I'm talking about? Multi-step directives. And what makes it not acceptable? Right, and the other reason it's not acceptable, is there a taxonomy you can refer to? Is there research to refer to? No research, no goal. You following me? Is there any research at all that gives you a taxonomy of how many directives kids should follow at particular ages, grades, or anything else? If it doesn't exist, you're really operating outside of ASHA's guidelines. It's not just me speaking, it is the professional organization we're dealing with. You following me? And I challenge anybody here to find the framework that cites that. Or 610, going to number 5, skipping across the adult stuff. A child will demonstrate appropriate expressive language skills to support functional communication in all communicative contexts. This is pulled from student reports at NYU, by the way. These were pulled from NYU students. Is this an acceptable goal from the Klein-Moses angle? Or it's ASHA as well. Demonstrate appropriate expressive language skills to support functional communication in all communicative contexts. Is that acceptable? And what makes it acceptable? Or not acceptable, what makes it non-acceptable, justifying? I realize it's dull. I think that it's that thing. That's all. Did it get bright? Is it, I'm asking you, acceptable or non-acceptable and
I
why?
would say non-acceptable.
Yeah. A is extremely vague. In other words, it's another way to say everything, and therefore nothing. And is there any developmental taxonomy attached to it that you could think of? Well, every one. I mean, everything and nothing. Now, the word functional sounds snazzy, and we did say functional communication, so they could lead you, well, language functions. But she didn't write, or he didn't write, you know, a variety of language functions, you know, age appropriate, maybe functions of language, which might be move this towards appropriateness. Following me? That's too broad. That's another way of saying expressive and receptive language. Well, this says language and phonology. Appropriate expressive language skills. Well, that's everything, and therefore nothing. Child number 7 will produce complex causal chain narratives in a variety of contexts. Acceptable as a long-term goal? It is, because I see you're shaking your head. I'm following your head shaking. Because complex causal chain narratives, yeah, I could point to Leahy or Stein and Glenn. You'll pick out the narrative. You would cite the taxonomy that guides you. That's a very good long-term goal, because that's accountable, that's specific, that's linguistic, that's got a taxonomy behind it. There's research about what sequences of narrative production you have, blah, blah, blah. And they can make arguments, well, is that culturally appropriate and stuff like that. Let's presume it is. Next one, child 3-7, phonology language will produce a range of complex sentences with appropriate connectives. Is that good? I'm skipping across the adults into number I can't see anymore, number 9. And what makes it cool? Justify.
This is going to be important in daily life, correct?
Well, everything's important in daily life, but what am I saying that the issue is? The number one issue, actually, I'll have to say. Does this fall into the number one? Yes? And
Well, it can support the taxonomy.
yeah, taxonomy can't support it. Bottom line, research can't support it. Once you say a range of complex sentences, well, we know what a complex sentence, 2 verbs or more sentence involving, so now we didn't put parentheses that got the taxonomy, but we certainly have the Bloom and Leahy taxonomy to support this, to give us a set of complex sentences, the order they come in, or what comes before the complex sentences. There are other taxonomies. Teal, you're looking like you're doubtful about this. Oh, you can't say it. Range of complex, and complex are observed, by the way, are these observable and measurable? Yes, they are. A complex sentence is absolutely operationalizable, it's observable. It's got 2 or more verbs. I defined, we can have Leahy to define a set of those things. Following me? In conversational speech, well, that's everyday talk, that's what we're talking about here. Shift to the article, which is not Word, it's in Adobe format. Questions? So given this kid, this is what, so let's look at, first of all, why, there we go. Look up right, cool. I said, so this is what we did, is summarize the diagnostic report here. So a diagnostic report is the first foundation for goal writing. It is baseline data. It's either going to be a diagnostic report or a summary report from the prior, a SOAP note, so to speak, or really an end-of-term report written about the last year's worth of intervention. So it's the latest diagnostic report. That's one of the basics of goal writing is it comes off of research and it comes out of the baseline data you have on your own client. It's relevant to the client, you see. So this kid was referred, why was he referred, does it say? Referred because he's been diagnosed as language delayed. His first words were, so we have background information on him. And we see that on the preschool language scale, I may have gone through this last time, but let's review this again. On the preschool language scale, this kid is, you see standard scores if you're in the other course, 605 with me or someone else, or you have research. You see a standard score of 71, 70, and 69 again. We mentioned this last week. That should immediately jump out at you as what level of delay are we looking at on a PLS, which are both it's expressive and reception here more or less. And total language score of 69, a 71, and a 70. What level of delay we got? Moderate, because how many standard deviations down are we looking at, did we say? 2, right, 2 down, 16 points equals is 1 standard deviation down. By ideal legislation, 1 down is mild, 2 down is moderate, 3 down is severe. Multiply 16 times 2, you get 32, take away, you get 68 is 2 down. Specifically within the confidence band, the child falls there on the PLS. It's a moderate delay. Well, moderate delay is about a third development. Then in contact form interactions, we saw again, he's producing primarily, what did we see? What did it say there? Through 5. So it's primarily single verb sentences with these content categories produced. And beginning to do the more advanced ones, state. And 2 verb sentences were emerging, particularly mood. No surprise, that's mood would be the first one out. And the child is how old? 5 or something like that? 5 years. 5 years and a month. Pretend play. He was into trains. And at 5, I would expect more than it looks delayed to me, I would expect at 5 a kid to do script play. So we have a moderate delay in a more adult-directed context. We have a moderate delay here, because at 5, what would you expect of a 5-year-old? The entire Bloom and Leahy thing, including all of them, we would expect a kid to be able to do causal chain narrative, up through causal chain narratives. So going down, then I'm going to jump to chapter 4 rather. And I'm going to use our little, rather than going through the chapter, go to those little charts we have. And look at the long-term goal chart for Darryl. I think 5 is wrong. Chapter 4. Chapter, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's going to take, this is not going to cause me trouble, because I'm on an Adobe reader, and not on the, it's because Apple wants me to use the things. I'll never get through these charts. I have to open this, I'm probably going to have to open this through, see if it'll work, with the Apple thing. Preview. Oops. Excuse me, and if you're watching me on the computer, I have to, it'll never let me do this. I'll get rid of Adobe. I'll open it with, I'm opening this with preview. If I open this with preview, it'll work. Apple wants you using Apple stuff.
Chris, I'm sorry, Broderick. The long-term goals PowerPoint is not on Blackboard.
I'll double check, but I'm sure, I'm gonna bet you it is, but I renamed it. Don't look, the names, you gotta look at something else. What's the first one under information? Course information, what's it called?
Yeah. And then the exam question two.
Oh, you don't have it from your thing?
No, then the syllabus.
Okay, I'll redo it then. I did do it, and I double checked it. Done. Okay, let's look then at a long-term goal for that kid, Darryl. Not a model, but Darryl. Darryl, okay, here. Here, and this is the way, for this kid, Darryl, first of all, the information that led to the long-term goal will produce conjoined, embedded, causal chain narratives in a variety of contexts. That's what we targeted for that kid. Why? Where did we come up with that? Why did we come up with that? Well, number one, we had to consider what was the delay in all the background information we had on this kid. Where was the delay? Well, it was in content form, use interactions, and morphology. This was a moderate delay. He was producing single word sentences. Now, is it enough for us? Now, we had an option for a long-term, say 3 years. I don't know how long you have, 3 years. In 3 years, given this kid, we had an option of just going with complex sentences and stopping there. But we're talking 3 years, and a 5-year-old should be producing, he's got a moderate delay, 3 years will put him at 8 years old, and we would want a kid to engage in discourse, if possible. But is this kid capable of that? Since he was beginning to produce complex sentences, but not completely. Well, what are some of the other considerations? Well, first of all, as you know, well, it's Moses and Klein writing, so we're into Bloom and Leahy, so no surprise we're going with that taxonomy. And it does give us, the Bloom and Leahy taxonomy does in fact address content form use interactions and morphemes, because all the little boxes on the chart are the morphemes. In fact, it gives us content form and use in the realm of content categories, types of narratives, and these things, the Bloom and Leahy taxonomy addresses mind function. It absolutely does, because content categories, story grammars, those are things produced, those are the language property of the mind output things. They're not bathroom vocabulary. They're not Robin Hood, a particular story. They are types of stories, types of complex sentences, types of things. We like types of things. This is us writing, of course. And what else contributed to the prognosis that allowed us to go to discourse and beyond just plain complex sentences? Well, I'll tell you. We considered the maintaining factors. We asked ourselves, well, we have a moderate language delay. What's the situation in terms of cognition? Well, he's typical or mild. It was a mild delay. That's not bad. That suggests he has ability. Was there much going on with sensory motor? Well, mild. He was, I think, mildly hypotonic. I know I'm skipping, as I remember. It was mild. And there was nothing social or emotional in there to consider. Well, mild delays in auxiliary systems means that it's reasonable to expect a kid who's 5, just beginning to produce complex sentences, in 3 years to get at discourse. So we went for it. Following me? And we also considered the family. What was the family's involvement here? Will we get follow-up outside of the speech therapy room? Well, in this case, yes. The parents seemed to be willing to engage with that client and participate in what we were doing. So we were optimistic in the goal. You following me? Now the goal again is written in, going with Bloom and Leahy, we went to chapter 11 and came up with the highest level narrative that she identified. Now culturally, we felt that this was appropriate since the kid's family was dealt with reading at home and stuff like that. It seemed culturally appropriate. Were there any subordinate goals? Yes, there were. Yes.
What is delayed equilibrium reactions?
I can't hear. Oh,
Delayed
equilibrium reactions.
Is that?
Oh yeah. What's an equilibrium reaction? It's what our body does. He was constantly on an ongoing basis to keep us doing what I'm doing. And head up, it's a vestibular thing. It's part of the vestibular systems thing, having to do with maintaining the speech posture of sitting or standing. Now, were there any subordinate goals? And the answer, yes. Was there? A range, yeah. We also, for long term, we did say he would produce a range of complex sentences with appropriate connectives because he wasn't yet doing that. And that's part of stories. We wanted his vocabulary to be more developed and that's something, of course, that goes across our age range, doesn't it? And that's a legitimate, subordinate, long-term goal. And it's linguistic in nature. And when I talk about vocabulary, I never say, it's another thing, not acceptable, to improve vocabulary, because that's everything. But recognizing that vocabulary organizes around nouns, verbs, prepositions, adverbs and adjectives and stuff like that, and those correspond to content categories, don't they, in terms of meaning, and they serve syntactic functions. In fact, they may be syntax itself, quite frankly, in terms of the case business. We think it's really important. And so we say across content categories within discourse context, sticking with the Bloom and Leahy terminology. I could have chosen Chomskyan terminology, but I didn't. And we'll produce the range of developmental morphemes. Well, that too. Does make sense to you? I hope that those are things that are also long-term components of the broader long-term goals. And they all give us directions for short-term goal writing. I'm now going to go to short-term goals for Darryl. And remember that the short-term goal will be written, will be guided by the long-term goal. You don't then just forget everything you wrote and just make new stuff up. But once you write, if you spent enough time thinking through the long-term goal, well, your short-term goals will almost write themselves. You will know which way to go. Because we said embedded causal chain narratives, that's all part of the Leahy 8+, that's 8+ on the taxonomy. I'll have the taxonomy on the table or on my computer screen, and I will pick out stuff. And what I do is see 3 years down the road, we're telling a story, but today we have the diagnostic report in front of me too. Well, Darryl's doing mood right now in the complex thing. So that's what he's doing. And he's not yet really engaging in discourse. But I remind myself what my long-term goals are, see where he's performing now, and you see that in the second box. He's content form use interactions are productive. Am I at Daryl here? Daryl, at phase 2 and 3 for these things, and 5 up through 5. So he's doing mood. So the next short-term goal is off of, well, I'm thinking a term down, one term down. So what do I think he can get beyond mood in one term? Well, additive is a possibility. The first 3 developmental long-term conjunction things, long complex sentences, are additive, temporal, or causal. On the presentation we had temporal, but here I'm going to say we said causal. We think that within 4 months we can get to causality, causal. We can do additive, temporal, and causal. We can get to causal in a problem-solving situation. It could be a simple causal one, not complex, but we can get causal from it. Following me? That's consistent. That's following the same taxonomy. So will produce complex sentences. That's observable. Expressing causal relationships. That's observable. In context of problem-solving tasks. That's suggestive. That context comes from our procedure planning, which I haven't addressed yet. I'm just sticking with goals. So we will always write the goal. We'll start out with the child's name, will, always will, future, because that's coming up, and then followed by an observable, measurable behavior. Causal, complex sentences expressing causal relationships. And a context of some sort. But for short term, we don't have to say the specific problem-solving thing. We're not going to say while playing with an axle task or something like that, because that's for the session. It's the long term, the short term is still going to be broad enough so that we have wiggle room there. Now in this short-term goal, we didn't put a 8 out of 10 trial thing there, a particular criterion for writing it. I myself would have, but my co-writer and colleague edited that out. Because it's Harriet's position that we don't really have to do that for a short-term goal. It is the position of DOE that we do, quite frankly. So you would have to say 8, you might say 4 times in a half an hour. I'll talk about criterion writing at the session level where I'm headed next. I'm trying to show you that the short-term goal is now written in the same developmental context as the long-term goal was written, because at the long-term level you will have identified a developmental taxonomy that will have specified the areas of language you will be targeting and the kind of language you use to describe it. You know, in Bloom and Leahy land, it's content category language, or it's additive, temporal, causal chain, story grammar language. I'm competing again with outside here. Are you following me here? If it was brown, it would be morpheme language or semantic function language, such as agent, action, object relation sentences, or agent, action, instrumental, or other kinds of more of the case structure language. Case assignment language. Is everybody following me? Do you have a question here? You see what I'm saying? I go to another client, but I would like to next instead, and then I'll go through other clients. talk about session goal writing. And session goal writing is going to shift gears. I'm going to shift gears here. Because in long-term and short-term goal writing, the goals, I stress this from our point of view, and I am presenting, it's not just Klein and myself, but it is an ASHA point of view, and it's also, again, Alan Camille and others out there express a similar sentiment here. Miriam Bugleri, who also teaches these classes for us here now. We're all talking on the same wavelength. Harriet Klein and others up there in Columbia University, we're talking similar. We're sending a similar message here, sending out a similar message. And that is long and short-term goals target the language property in the mind, and therefore they target developmental things, relational things, such as semantic categories, content categories, sentence structures, such as SVC sentences, or conjunction sentences, or complementation sentences, or relative clause sentences, or language use stuff, like the functions of language, comment, request, command, etc., pretend, or stories and connect and stuff like that, contingency, sentence contingency and coherence, etc. Those are always the word, or in phonology, we're talking about phonologic processes, phonemes, phonologic processes, word structures, syllable structures, stress patterns, etc. If you're following me, we are not talking about expressive and receptive language. We are not talking about sequencing. We are not talking about following directions, 7-step commands, or any kind of jargon, meme terminology like the ones I'm saying. What I'll call meme terminology. General things that really are not based on research or linguistic things, that are not functional communication. We're not talking about memory. We can't say memory or retrieving things, because that's not functional communication. They're memeing things, not to improve auditory processing. Right. So let me go to, in going to session goals, I'm going to shift gears here and talk about, first I want to talk about procedures of intervention. That is, planning the context in which kids learn the stuff we're targeting. Creating contexts, and context refers to linguistic and non-linguistic interactions with kids that gets them to learn. Because the session goal we define as an act of learning. It's not a mental structure of some sort, a property of the mind, a relationship-making quality. It is an actual act of learning. Now, it could be making relationships, but we have to view it as an act of learning. And an act of learning, approaching goal setting as an act of learning, is just a little bit different than simply thinking about it as a target off of a developmental taxonomy. A session goal is an act of learning. So that jumps to, and you'll see then in the Klein and Moses book there, or the Moses and Klein chapters there, that session goals appear in chapter 5. The actual development of session goals, I think they appear in chapter 5. And the name of chapter 5 there is procedure planning. It's envisioning a procedure planning. Part 2, procedure planning. All of the goals and procedures together we refer to as a management plan, something that you would generate. So session goals certainly have to relate to the long-term and short-term goals. So for Darrell, the long-term goal was narratives, particularly causal chain narratives, and the short-term goals and the narratives and producing complex sentences, and then the short-term goal. The short-term goal was causal chain narratives and complex sentences, additive, temporal, and causal, if I remember correctly. Complex sentences, and then related lexicon and morphology. And now the question is, so for an active learning, now we're thinking about, well, what's going to get the kid to learn this stuff? And you're now going back to evidence. I'm going to plow. Let me stop this. Take a break for a couple of minutes and then continue on. Oh yeah, we go to 4. Yeah. Well, this is where I'm headed. Chapter session goal planning. That's enough. Feels like enough to me. Am I making sense here?
Yeah.
I hope so.
Just that background music.
Yeah, I know, it's irritating. What can I do?
I know. Who's staying for this? Whose fault is this? Fine. Like, this isn't logic. I don't know why.
Whatever you're doing, they're going to do on Monday at 2 o'clock.
It sounds like fun, it's just unfortunate.
Oh, okay.
Actually, yeah, we're 1:30 to 4:30. And my kid is in there, that's fine.
That was amazing. I was like,